Welcome to Dr Joe Unplugged. This podcast contains general information and is not in any way medical advice. For the first time in 30 years, measured life expectancy for Australians has gone down. Right, maybe it's not quite as bad as it sounds. The latest statistics from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, who put out a two-yearly report, they're a pretty useful group for government instrumentality. They gather statistics on a whole host of issues and crunch them together, and generally, with an impressive degree of neutrality. It's only 1 month less than the last measure 2 years ago. So that's not a big deal, but what is probably more notable is that an upwards trend, and that upwards trend has been going for the best part of a century or more, has been halted and slightly reversed. Australia's doing better than the USA, where life expectancy fell from just under 79 years in 2019 to 76.4 in 2021, and in the UK from 81.3 in 2019 to 80.4 in 2020. In Australia, the most recent statistics are for 2022, so we may find that the figures from the US and the UK might even be a little bit lower. Australian life expectancy is around 84 years for a female and a bit less than that for a male. None of us are going to live forever. That is a given. And the other interesting work done by the AIHW is looking at causes of death. Now, again, I want to emphasise that each and every one of us is going to shuffle off this proverbial mortal coil one day. And typically, or traditionally, if you like, death certificates will have a cause of death, as in a single cause. And many, many years ago, that was probably quite appropriate. You may well have been killed by a chest infection. There previously was nothing wrong with you. You got overwhelming pneumonia or tuberculosis. In different parts of the world, maybe malaria. Perhaps sepsis, which is an infection in the bloodstream secondary to a kidney infection. So this is typically when life expectancy was less, and you're more likely to die of either infection or trauma. You might have been shot or run over or met some other untimely fate. Now, even today, if you've been run over by the proverbial truck and before that there was nothing particularly wrong with you, even if you did have some, or even if you've had some other illnesses that were not about to get you, you've been run over by a truck or suffered some trauma, that is your cause of death. There aren't really any other contributing factors. But that's not really what happens in most instances these days. People may have a number of medical conditions, not just one. They may have cancer and heart disease and kidney problems and diabetes. And the question then arises, which one of those is responsible for death? And realistically, it's going to be all of the above. So they are now looking more at underlying causes rather than single cause, which is a good thing. And it's also been shown, work out of America, that death certificates are often wrong because they are a best guess. Somebody was alive one day, they're not alive the next day. It could be argued quite correctly that nothing massive has changed between one day and the next. They've had all these conditions, but one day the body just says no more, but it's not as if there's a new condition that has come in. The most common causes and contributors is not particularly new, are heart disease and different forms of cancer. The most common conditions contributing to death typically reflect chronic diseases, I'm quoting now from an AIHW release, and risk factor-related health conditions. Include high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease, substance issues, excess alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs were also common contributory factors, dementia, and also even osteoporosis, which is a brittleness of the bone. It's not something of itself that you die of, but if because of brittle bones, it's more likely that you have a significant fracture when you fall over, that does, and this has been known for many, many years, that can unleash what's called a cascade that eventually does contribute in a significant way to your demise. Again, Causes of death by age vary quite considerably between the ages of 15, 64 and above. In those younger ages, it is still more likely that it could be related to traffic trauma, accidental poisoning, suicide even, and also motor vehicle collisions. Tobacco remains a significant contributory factor in a lot of deaths. In fact, it's estimated that it's a contributor to 20,000 premature deaths, meaning people who have died perhaps before they otherwise would if they were not smoking. Still a major factor. Less than 20 and 30 and 40 years ago, but still a major factor. So you would think that reducing smoking would be a priority for the big public health establishment. And in New Zealand it is, in the UK it is, in the USA to a degree as well, Canada, the EU. Very sadly, and it could be argued tragically, not in Australia. Now, we've spoken on this podcast before about vaping, which, according to the Cochrane collaboration and the UK government and New Zealand government and lots of work, you can check this up if you want in PubMed, the world's most effective and popular stop smoking method. Nothing works for everybody. Patches work for some people, gums work for some people, just cold turkey works for some people, hypnosis works for some people, fantastic. But vaping, which is use of e-liquid nicotine, is the most popular and effective. And according to work done, again, by the UK government, not by any industry, at least 95% less harmful than smoking. So not harmless. If you don't smoke, don't take it up. And in New Zealand, they've seen their smoking rates halve over the last few years because not only is vaping legal and regulated, it's actually promoted. They're telling people switch to vaping. Get off the cigarettes. Not so in Australia, where they've made it illegal to import nicotine liquid. That's what people were doing previously. It's estimated that there are 1 million vapers in Australia. Nobody's got absolute numbers. And there were vape shops and people could get flavours and devices, and the system worked. And no, the government's decided that's no good. Got to force people to go to chemist shops. The chemist shops don't particularly want to sell vapes. Fair enough, it's not their business. Vapers don't want to go to chemist shops. They want to go to the shops where people know about vaping and can be helpful. So, it is now easier, far easier, for people to go back to smoking, and we're already seeing evidence of that. And Australia's smoking rates are already falling at a far slower rate than in New Zealand. Now, what about youth vaping? In New Zealand and UK and these other countries, they don't have the massive problems Australia has. Why? Because they have a regulated market with, you only can buy it at shops, you need ID. Think alcohol. It's not impossible that people drink underage. It happens, but we don't have a thriving black market in underage drinking because we have a regulated system with appropriate taxation. Same can be done with vaping. And we can, as they say in America, walk and chew gum. So we can do our best. It's never going to be perfect. But we can do our best to protect youth, and we can help people quit smoking, given that it's a significant contributor to premature death. So do I expect that off the basis of this AIHW data, which is really quite straightforward, that we're going to see an epiphany from what could be the worst health minister this country has ever had? Look, I wouldn't like to predict it, but, certainly in the world in July, we've seen events that might have taken us by surprise. So you never want to rule anything out. But the key message really at the end of all of this is, we are all going to have a finite period of time on this planet. We want to make the best of it. We want to be looking after ourselves. So it's not about not eventually exiting. It's about being as healthy as you can for the longest period of time that you can be. And that comes back not to taking more medications, not to following government programs. It comes back to the basics. Eating like our ancestors did. Foods that until fairly recently were either moving around or growing somewhere. Drinking mainly water, not soft drinks or other beverages. You can have a glass of wine, I like it too, from time to time, or whatever your favourite beverage is, that's fine, but drinking mainly water. Getting out into the fresh air, getting some regular physical activity and exercise, getting enough sleep. tending your relationships, managing your stress, enjoying what you're doing. It's a bit like your car. You put the right type of fuel in, you keep the tyres pumped, you top up the coolant. Doesn't mean the car will run forever, but it's going to break down less frequently and it'll run better. And the human body, if you get the basics right and they're not difficult and they're not expensive, and no, you don't need a degree in anything to be able to do it, will keep you in as good a shape as you can be. And again, no force fields, doesn't guarantee you can't get sick, but keep you in as best shape that you can be for the longest that you can be. Thanks for listening to Dr. Joe Unplugged. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, like, and share. You can also follow it on all the socials. There'll be new content uploaded each week.